Grab and Gojek were to merge, what will it mean? We'll discuss the potential implications for customers and competition.
Singapore will contribute $5 million to ensure poorer nations get sufficient quantities of COVID-19 vaccines.
And NASA will pay a company $1 to collect small amounts of dust on the surface of the moon.
Hello, welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Harianto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. We begin with news on the possible deal between ride-hailing firms Grab and Gojek. The Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore is aware of news relating to both firms and pointed out that competition rules forbid such unions if they result in diminished competition.
Well, in its statement, the competition watchdog said it has written to the parties for more information. It added, quote, under Singapore's competition law, Section 54 of the Competition Act prohibits mergers that have resulted or may be expected to result in a substantial lessening of competition.
Meanwhile, Reuters reported yesterday that Grab's CEO Anthony Tan told staff in an internal note that the firm was in a position to make acquisitions, but he didn't give any specifics about a potential deal. Both Grab and Gojek declined to comment.
And according to an earlier Bloomberg report, under one proposal being discussed that has substantial support, Mr. Tan would become the CEO of the combined entity, while Gojek executives would run the new combined business in Indonesia under the Gojek brand.
Let's hear more from the Straits Times' senior transport correspondent, Christopher Tan. Hi, Chris. Chris, CCCS is looking into this. How is this similar or different to Grab's deal with Uber back in 2018?
I think when it came to Uber and Grab, the situation was a bit different because the two were of almost equal size. So if the two merged, and they did after all, it would result in some kind of dilution of competition. And it did. If you remember, after they merged, Grab quickly removed some of the incentives to drivers. There was a lot of hue and cry, and eventually they brought some of it back. They reverted to some of the previous rates. But yeah, now the difference is that Gojek seems to be a much smaller player than Grab in Singapore. In other countries where both of them operate, let's say in Indonesia, for instance, the home country of Gojek, it is Gojek that holds the upper hand. Gojek has a much bigger presence. Its app is used a lot more frequently by people over there than Grab, and we also hear accounts that Grab actually has been buying market share by lowering its rates. And in the other markets like Malaysia and Vietnam and all that, it is again Grab that has the biggest share. So I think if we come to a merger between these two, I think there will not be as much of a competition dilution as we saw with Grab and Uber.
Right. Well, in the case with Uber, Grab was fined $13 million by the CCCS for infringing competition laws. So why is Grab pursuing another merger or acquisition or whatever this is when it can again possibly result in another hefty fine?
Well, I can possibly come up with two reasons. One is that the fine, it's going to be worked into the math of the union anyway, cost of business, if you like. Two, they are confident that they can make a case to what I've just mentioned, that the two are actually of not equal sizes, and that a union, a merger or acquisition would not result in any meaningful dilution of competition.
So Chris, if the union were to go through, what is the impact for commuters and ride-hailing drivers as well?
I think there would be probably some kind of change in rates. As with all mergers, even in mergers between big and small companies, there is going to be some change. If it's going to be the same as usual, then there's no reason for a merger. But I do not think that the impact will be as huge as the one that we saw when Uber and Grab got together.
Right. Well, it's always good to hear from you, Christopher. We've been speaking to senior transport correspondent at the Straits Times, Christopher Tan. Look out for his analysis on this developing story in tomorrow's paper or at straitstimes.com.
Here's an update on the COVID-19 situation here. 3 new cases were confirmed today. None were in the community or from within workers' dormitories.
Well, all the cases today were imported and were placed on stay-home notices or isolated when they arrived in Singapore. The Health Ministry will share more details tonight.
In other local news, Singapore will contribute $5 million to ensure sufficient production of COVID-19 vaccines and access for developing countries. The Health and Foreign Affairs Ministry said this will help 92 low and lower middle income countries access vaccines through the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility. ASEAN countries eligible for this aid include Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines and Vietnam.
The slump in retail sales eased in October, although most segments still registered double-digit declines. According to data released by the Department of Statistics today, takings at the till dropped 8.6% compared with last year. The slump in takings was led by food and alcohol, followed by department stores. The estimated total retail sales value was about $3.3 billion, of which online retail sales made up an estimated 10.5%.
A man who was speeding when his car struck a taxi in 2018, resulting in the death of an NUS student, has been fined $5,000. Ng Li Ning was also disqualified from driving all classes of vehicles for 2 years. He was ordered to pay the fine on November 27th after he pleaded guilty in a district court to driving at a speed that was dangerous to the public.
Well, Malaysia is set to announce whether it will extend the conditional movement control order currently in place over most states in the country, because daily new cases have remained persistently high despite these controls being in place for weeks. And of course, this has prompted calls from experts for more targeted and stricter lockdowns in higher risk zones.
The CMCO has been extended before to December 6th in some territories like Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya and Selangor. Compared to the movement control order, regulations under the CMCO are more relaxed, with all economic and social sectors allowed to operate in a controlled manner.
Well, here are some rules under the CMCO. All economic activities are allowed to operate, but under strict SOP guidelines. Employees in the public sector and industries under the International Trade and Industry Ministry who live within CMCO areas are required to work from home.
Only 2 people from each household are allowed to shop for essentials, like at the supermarket, shopping malls and grocery stores. Dining at restaurants are allowed, but there is a cap.
Gatherings, though, for occasions like weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, sports and cultural events are not allowed. Friday prayers are allowed during the CMCO, but with a limited number of congregants.
Only 3 people are allowed to travel in the same vehicle, and inter-district travel is not allowed for areas under the CMCO except for work or emergencies. And interstate travel is only permitted between green zone states.
Well, Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teo is back again to give us an update. So Shannon, as we wait for this announcement, mentally, psychologically, are Malaysians ready for the CMCO to be extended?
Well, I'm not, but I think it's not a question of ready. I think Malaysians are resigned for it to be extended. If you look at the case numbers, I don't think there is any real chance that the CMCO will be lifted in certain specific states like Selangor and in Sabah, where case numbers continue to be in the hundreds per day. So I think people are gearing up for an extension. I don't think people are psychologically very thrilled about it, but that has been what people call it the new normal. You can make plans, but at any given time, you might have to cancel them.
Malaysia reported just over 1,000 new COVID-19 cases yesterday. Shannon, can you give us more details on the current situation? Are the foreign worker dorms the sole source contributing to this latest wave?
Well, they're not the sole source, but they are a primary source. A lot of the cases that have come in over the past couple of weeks, because I think Singapore had a similar situation. The foreign worker dorms are very cramped. They house hundreds of workers at a single time. If one person is tested positive, it usually spreads to nearly everyone else in the dorm. So once that happens, then the entire dorm is tested and you get a huge spike in numbers, hundreds of them. But they're not the only ones to blame by a long shot. There are community cases. They have been spread to states like Negeri Sembilan, just south of the Klang Valley. And Seremban itself, the capital, was registering several dozen cases a day, and this was all in the community. Another large portion of cases is coming from detention centers, from prisons. So another situation where if the housing situation is cramped, if there are a lot of people pushed together into the same housing, then you're going to get a huge spike in cases. Now, this has also shown a spotlight on the situation in our prisons. A lot of them are overcrowded. There are more inmates than what the facility was built for. So these are you might say that the silver lining of COVID-19 is that it's really shining a light and putting a focus on this situation of, are we treating our foreign workers properly? Are we treating even our inmates properly?
Right. Well, this was the case that we saw in Singapore as well, igniting this kind of public debate on certain segments of the population. Well, Shannon, we've been seeing reports of experts calling for more targeted measures instead of statewide CMCOs. So how would specific measures prove more effective, especially when it comes to containing the virus, while at the same time not further compromising economic activities?
Well, I think that strategy is being suggested more towards ensuring that the economy can still roll on, rather than as a measure to effectively control the numbers. If you wanted to control the numbers and really get the numbers back to single digits, you do a full-scale lockdown across the entire country for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then the numbers will really go down because the virus will stop being in the community. But what these experts are trying to suggest is a better balance. The government suggested the CMCO as a compromise between ensuring that the economic activity continues, but also that to ensure that the way the virus could spread would also be reduced. Still social distancing, less people coming out and doing social activities, so on and so forth. What these experts are suggesting is that if you lock down a certain area, say a particular cluster, a foreign worker dorm, which they are already doing, a certain workplace where there has been a huge spread, then you isolate these cases in total lockdowns, but you let everything else continue. What this relies on, however, is very swift contact tracing, very swift action. It means that once there is a positive case, you are already tracing all the close contacts of family members and quarantining all of them. Whether we have the wherewithal to roll out many small targeted lockdowns all across the country, no one's really answered that question. It is going to take more resources than a blanket CMCO, because then you can just put the policemen on the streets, you can put enforcers at buildings, and you can just do raids, targeted raids and things like that. So I think the question now is not so much which is the better strategy, but which strategy can you realistically enforce?
Well, good points there, Shannon. Thank you for the update. That was Malaysia Bureau Chief at the Straits Times, Shannon Teo, joining us from Kuala Lumpur.
Well, in other global headlines, over 1.5 million people have died from COVID-19 worldwide, with one death reported every 9 seconds. 500,000 deaths occurred in just the last 2 months, indicating that the severity of the pandemic is far from over. Last week alone, more than 10,000 people have died every day on average.
The country worst affected is still the US, and President-elect Joe Biden has asked the country's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, to stay on in his administration. Dr. Fauci, who is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, will continue as chief medical advisor and be part of the COVID-19 advisory team. Mr. Biden also plans to call for 100 days of mask wearing on his inauguration day. He told CNN that he would issue a standing order that Americans must wear masks in federal buildings and on interstate transportation, such as airplanes and buses.
Well, meanwhile, former U.S. Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton have volunteered to have their coronavirus vaccinations publicly televised. The trio said they would get inoculated once a vaccine has been approved by regulators and recommended by U.S. health officials. With polls indicating that many in the U.S. are reluctant to get vaccinated, this move is intended to boost public confidence in the safety and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. Mr. Biden has also said that he'll be happy to get the jab publicly to assuage concerns about the vaccine.
Meanwhile, NASA has awarded contracts to 4 firms to collect soil from the moon. These contracts, ranging from $1 to $15,000 will see the firms collect small amounts of lunar soil during unmanned missions in 2022 and 2023. The firms will provide NASA with imagery of the collection and the collected moon dust. Ownership of the lunar soil will then be transferred to NASA as the agency's sole property under the Artemis program. Under this program, NASA plans to land a man and a woman on the moon by 2024, as well as lay the groundwork for sustainable exploration and a mission to Mars.
Well, let's come back down to earth, shall we? It's December, and who knows, if not for the pandemic, some of you would be vacationing overseas right now.
Well, Japan is usually a popular destination. Now, in 2019, Singaporeans spent roughly 1.05 billion Singapore dollars in Japan, the 10th highest spending nation of travelers there.
So while Singapore may not be able to recreate all of Japan's facets, the good news is there are still ways to experience the land of the rising sun from the Little Red Dot, like the traditional tea ceremony and kimono dressing. Hey, you can also catch the Japanese Film Festival in Singapore, which will run from December 10th to the 20th. There are physical screenings at Shaw Theatre's Lido and the Projector, as well as virtual streaming on Shaw Kino Lounge.
With the December holidays upon us, these are just some ideas on how you can experience another country's culture right here in Singapore. For more, you can head to this link to our SG GoWare microsite.
Well, do visit straitstimes.com for more news and videos as well. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Thanks for watching The Big Story, and we'll see you next week. Sayonara!